It's time for a special edition of Fallback. I'm joined by Emmy Award-winning actor John Turturro, currently starring in the film Gloria Bell, along with Julianne Moore. Other notable films include Quiz Show, Michael Bay's Transformers franchise, and of course, the collaborations with the Coen brothers, including the unforgettable role as Jesus Quintana in The Big Lebowski, one of our favorites. Turturro also played a scrappy lawyer in the HBO hit The Night Of, which is something he has in common with our other guest. Nick Ackerman also plays a lawyer on television and was a federal prosecutor in the Southern District, and of course, a Watergate special prosecutor. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Great to be here.
Nick, who needs to fall back?
Who needs to fall back is Roger Stone. I mean, his Instagram account is absolutely his problem here. He's got me on his Instagram page, and he calls me a cranky old man. Now, first of all, I'm not cranky. You know that. And old, well, yeah, but Roger Stone isn't that much, younger than me. And I'm also not senile, which he also claims.
Do you get the feeling that Roger may have wanted to be an actor in another life?
Well, a lot of these guys are actors. They're more of an actor than I am, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I think there are many people in the political arena. I could never do what they do because I try to really believe what I'm doing and research what I'm doing, so I understand something about the topic that I'm portraying.
Yeah. John, what do you think needs to fall back?
I think the oversimplification of any news topic is something that it really sort of bothers me. Just the oversimplification, how they make everything into black and white, devoid of an historical context. And so the loss of nuance, I think, is a major problem. And that's why these things like Instagram and when you're tweeting and everything, it's devoid of nuance.
Do you think it's something that is accelerated by the internet, or is it in our nature as human beings to oversimplify?
I think it's been accelerated. Absolutely.
We heard you might do this, and I have some examples to throw up here for you.
Oh, really?
To see, yeah, because we heard this was on your mind.
Oh, God.
Here's one, a headline that says, scientists reveal 3 keys to happiness.
Right.
Oversimplified or not?
Oversimplified.
Are illegal immigrants, this headline says, the ones ruining America? Oversimplified?
Oversimplified.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, these are complex topics and with complex solutions, but once you demonize a whole group of people, I mean, everyone was an immigrant, and they're talking about illegal immigrants, but that's a complex topic.
I got something that you guys have in common. You've done so many great performances. One of them that speaks to the Nick Ackermans of the world was your portrayal of a very hard-scrabble defense attorney in The Night Of on HBO. Let's take a look.
To the presumption of his innocence beyond a reasonable doubt. We hear that term a lot. What does it really mean? Huh? What's its definition? It doesn't have one. It's what we think. And as much as what we think, what we feel. And what we feel.
Nick, how'd he do?
I thought he did pretty well. I mean, it was good. I mean, next trial I have, you're going to do my summation. I thought that was great. Now, I'm surprised the judge didn't intervene, because once you say there's no definition of beyond a reasonable doubt, the judge gives a very specific charge on that. So this is like kind of a typical television or movie type.
Oh, my God. John,
you have to take a liberty.
Hold on. Leave it to Nick Ackerman.
I disagree with him.
Leave it? Yeah, go ahead. Why?
No, he's right.
Leave it to Nick Ackerman to say there would be an objection.
Of course.
Yes, of course there would. But what did you think of the feeling and the
well, you
thought?
have to see it in context.
No, but he was looking at the jury. He was being honest. He was basically connecting with people. And I think that's what makes a great summation and a great trial.
You felt so raw and real in that role. How did you get to that place?
I spent a lot of time with a lot of lawyers who were very helpful to me. Every life is valuable. So I don't know how I would feel if I had someone's life in my hands, you know. So that was the idea. Yeah.
There's something very, like, gentle about you.
Me? Well, I think gentleness is underrated. I think Abraham Lincoln said there's nothing stronger than gentleness. And I think that's something in our society that there's a great lack of. And because usually the wisest people, it comes from a quiet place, not from a loud place. People who can hold your attention and take space and dominate the scene will be elected, but they may be the worst leaders. And it's history has proved that many times over. may I add? But I guess if it wasn't for my business, probably, and a writer's strike in the 90s, maybe reality television would have never happened. And because of reality television, someone was able to hone a persona and to bring them all the way up into the most powerful position in the country. And that is an essential thing, because you learn like basic craft elements of how to keep someone's attention. And people were convinced that this was the character, and it's actually a fabrication of who the person actually was. And so we've seen this over and over, again.
I think it's a great reminder and a toast to gentility.
Okay.
John Turturro,
Thank you.
Nick Ackerman, thanks to both of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.